Quest Software has solutions that allow you to add an additional layer of security to your Microsoft environment. To learn how they can help you protect and detect changes in your environment, please go to quest.com/MPM. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV's courses live and on demand worldwide, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Their team solution provides access to a supervisor portal for full control over your team's training schedule and group analytics. Visit itpro.tv/enterprise security and use the code ES30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. To learn more about IT Pro TV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal. Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the Pwn Pad, Pwn Phone, and Pwn Pro. For enterprises, there's Pwn Pulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Onapsis has a webcast that it will be held tomorrow. Make sure you check this one out. And I realize the title may not have been enticing enough for folks, and it requires some explanation. Really quick, Seba is the head of Onapsis Research Labs. He's based in Argentina. They just do a phenomenal job. In just the month of October, his team uncovered 4 vulnerabilities in SAP and 15 in Oracle Business Applications. And likely if you work for a large enterprise, you have these applications. And I know securing business-critical applications doesn't sound all that exciting. However, we're going to talk to Seba about his team and all these different vulnerabilities, how they work, how they discovered them, what they mean for your business, and how to remediate them going forward. And the fact that in just 1 month, he found 19 vulnerabilities just in 1 month on his team means there was a lot more. There's hundreds in just that month. So there's a big problem that we need to talk about. So go to securityweekly.com/Onapsis and make sure you check that out. John, we've got some...
Yes.
Well, first we have a correction on Tanium, and this makes total sense now. Previously, we stated that Tanium has an agent, and when you have agents, how do you know where to install the agent if you don't know that assets exist? So how can agents do asset discovery? And it makes total sense that Tanium would include capabilities inside of their agents, and I quote, to actively monitor and scan their local subnets for unmanaged assets around them and report back newly discovered ones. I mean, you can also have the agent look at connections in the connections table. And this
browser announcements on the local network.
Yeah, there's all sorts of ways. They actively monitor and scan the local subnet to do that. Now, you have to collect that information and go put the agents on those systems, but Tanium does allow for that functionality. So I apologize. I did want to run that correction for Tanium.
Cool.
Alrighty, John.
Well,
where do you want to start?
Let's start with Komodo, because I'd like to know how the hell this actually works. It's really, really cool. I'll basically set up the article. So Komodo launches a free service to remove website malware. So they have this service called Komodo Sea-Watch, where they can actually monitor your website for X number of dollars. I think it's like $10 or $9 a month, and they'll watch for different attacks, and then they'll also go through and clean up any vulnerabilities or malware that shows up on it. And my question is, how are they doing this so incredibly cheap? Whenever you think about the tremendous amount of different website technologies that are out there, it's kind of impressive if that's actually what they're doing. So this is an interesting service.
You probably the same question I do. Like, how do I give them the appropriate level of access to do this monitoring control of my web application? It doesn't sound like I have to host it with them. It sounds like I give them access to it. They monitor. If they find bad things, malicious code that's been installed, they remove it. Now, I think for the mid-market and smaller organizations with very small teams, this is an attractive service for you because you may not have the resources or the bandwidth or the expertise to monitor all your applications. So I think for our enterprise customers, this could also be interesting too, because, hey, maybe this is something you can take off your plate, right? Like, I think it's kind of cool. How they do that, though, is my question.
Well, and they also have their pricing. It goes anywhere from $9 a month to Enterprise, which is $149 a month. And part of me almost wonders if they're not actually hooking into like the event logs on the web server, because you and I have talked for years about how a web application attack where someone's trying to find SQL injection, cross-site scripting, command injection, any of those vulnerabilities is not a stealthy attack.
Right.
Usually it generates a tremendous amount of log traffic. So maybe they're hooking into that somehow. I don't know. I do think it is needed. There's a tremendous market for this. I know my brother in particular had a web application that was compromised for one of his businesses, a small business, and it was devastating. He had no place that he could actually go to take care of it. So it's interesting. And if maybe someone that's using it could shoot us an email and let us know what they think of it, because it's pretty cool.
Absolutely. What do you think about GDPR analytics? I thought this one was kind of interesting. RiskIQ is trying to help organizations with GDPR. And I mean, I get it. You can go look for PII in, sometimes we call that DLP, sometimes we call that just forensics or analysis of what sensitive data lives where. And they're trying to map that back to GDPR. I think there needs to be a human involved in this process because it's not very straightforward. We've done segments on GDPR, but RiskIQ joins the growing list of vendors that are trying to help with this so-called problem.
So it's interesting what they did. It just by reading the article and how it was kicked out, it appears that they scanned a number of different European Union websites, and they saw if they were actually collecting PII insecurely, i.e. that would be over HTTP instead of HTTPS. And what they discovered was Banks Data Security revealed 1,800 insecure login forms, 1,600 pages collecting PII insecurely. So that maybe not be a login like a user ID and password, but they're collecting information about you as an individual in like an HTTP way is what I would think. And then also 1,300 first-party cookie violations and 1,200 third-party cookie violations. So it could be a mix, just so you guys know. It could be that these are websites that were using clear text. It could also be that they're using insecure cipher suites and SSL, or they're even using SSL. They should be using TLS. But it is an interesting approach what they're doing from a marketing perspective. They're basically pointing out, look, there's a huge number of organizations that are already not in compliance with GDPR. And I think it's calling attention to a larger problem in security is that I think that there's still only a small percentage of companies in the EU that actually know what GDP is and how it's actually going to impact them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I like, it's interesting. To be honest, I've heard kind of mixed reviews on Forcepoint's product suite. And, I can't comment on that other than what people have reported. The review's been mixed. I can say I do like their marketing approach and their approach to the problem in that they've put human-centric in their marketing. In speaking with them, they very much focused on the human-centric aspect of it, which I think is very interesting. I think it's a pretty bold move, as a lot of companies are touting machine learning and AI as the solution to all of your problems. Forcepoint's taking a different approach and saying, no, this is still a human-centric thing, which John and I have talked all year, ever since we started the show, that having a human involved is super important for a whole load of reasons. So I like Forcepoint's take on this. I like their point of view that they're saying that security has to be human-centric.
It does, and right now, I think with the product offering, how it's not, I don't want to say it's fundamentally different than anybody else, because it's not. There's lots of people that are doing kind of the same thing, but by focusing on web filtering, by focusing on data loss prevention, by focusing on CASB type solutions for things like Office 365, they're basically trying to create that protective insulative layer around the individuals in an organization. Now, once again, there's lots of vendors that are doing this, and you're absolutely right, Paul. I hear a lot of mixed things. But Forcepoint is one of those companies that started out as WebSense, and then they became Forcepoint, and there's a lot of history and a tremendous amount of baggage with a company like that. Just because you can't spawn up, be a new company, and have brand new impressions of the company out of the gate, because you literally have almost a decade of impressions of the product as it goes forward. But I will say that they're one of the most heavily used products that we see in our penetration tests. And I'm not saying that they're good or they're bad. They basically perform about par for the course. But I also like this particular marketing approach, since we're kind of critiquing marketing approaches for companies. They talk about how they actually do it, what they actually do, and then they actually talk about one of their customers that's utilizing the product. And I think that that's a really welcome breath of fresh air in the marketing propaganda that we see. It's not just buzzword, 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 buy our product. It's actually kind of explaining their approach and then talking about a real customer that uses their product, which is it's kind of cute and furry and it's neat.
Well, and it's interesting, having just done a briefing with a company that's in the space that would surprise you that they're in the space, I think. When we talk about human-centric, right, we look at data loss prevention, and it being very focused on looking for the data. When you say human-centric, are we looking at human behavior, not the security people being involved as analysts, but the human-centric aspect of looking at behavior in your network and user behavior? And yeah, there's user behavior analytics, but Observe It is actually very focused on tracking a person's behavior and also playing in this data loss prevention thing and saying, well, it's one thing to go look for the data, but why don't we look at what the people are doing? And it's interesting how they've differentiated themselves from EUBA and from DLP to say, you know, like we took that technology that we have and they've kind of morphed it a little bit. And I think are providing a much more, talking with all the companies, I like Observe It's approach even better because they are very focused on the human and have proven that more so than just saying, hey, we're human-centric and we have DLP, which kind of conflicts each other.
Well, and for the love of God, I think over 90% of all the breaches that happen are basically spear phishing attacks, and there needs to be a better focus on that. A lot of organizations, they basically find a product that they can slap on for web filtering and some type of email filtering, and then they call it good. They don't bother trying to monitor or look at any logs or anything of that nature. But it seems like that's the harder problem, right? Lance Spitzer talks about this all the time with securing the human, about how do we actually bring the human into this and actually try to defend them. And I think that a lot of people run screaming from an endpoint user because they're a freaking train wreck to try to get them to do the right thing. And that might also drive why whenever I talk about products like Forcepoint, a lot of security professionals have mixed impressions because you still have users that'll find a way to get around that product. You know, these products are 95% effective on their best days. And all it takes is one user that's trying to desperately get around that product and you're pretty well hosed. And it's basically it boils down to, this is a really freaking hard problem, trying to secure human beings because we are without question the weakest link. So maybe we shouldn't beat up vendors too much that are trying to move into the space of some creative solutions.
So, as you know, container adoption is skyrocketing, to quote this article. Gartner, for whatever it's worth, is predicting more than 50% of enterprises will be running containers in production by 2020. Now, I actually agree with Gartner's prediction here. I'm not sure what they base that on, but I do agree with it. This company called CloudHealth is very much focused on what they call container governance, and this really isn't security related. This is more about visibility of resources, optimizing those resources, and controlling your costs. So it's not really about security. I think some of the harder questions that we have to answer about security when we get into the details involve a lot more research and analysis and promotion of like how we actually solve those problems, especially as we talk about, let's say, vulnerability management. And my thinking is, and I have to go back and look at the container security companies, and I'm sure someone's going to start screaming names at me. It probably will be Matt Alderman. But if I deploy a bunch of containers on a host, do I have something on that host that can look inside my containers and tell if there's vulnerable software running in them? Now, the other approach, which I like better, but I think there's two different problems here, is I get in with the developers, and as they're creating the containers and deploying the containers, I'm saying, well, you're deploying this container, and you've got a heinous vulnerability in that container. You should fix that before you move to step 2, right, or step 0 to step 1. But I also feel like that once the containers are running, you can reach into those containers, obviously, and see if stuff's running in production. What's the strategy there? Should you do both? Should you do either? And how does that work? And I think time will tell.
Well, but this is something we keep talking about on the show. This is not a defined area yet for computer security. Whenever we're talking about containers, what does that actually mean? Do you mean microservices? Is that necessarily a container? And I know there's people out there that have a very firm, defined sense of what they think a container is, and they're brilliant. I mean, we work with a lot of these people, but if I sit down with 2-3 of them over the course of a couple of weeks, they all have different definitions, and things get squirrely. So what are the vulnerabilities that exist in containers? What are the vulnerabilities that exist in something like Docker? How do you manage that with Kubernetes or Docker Swarm? And then this is also interesting. They talk about AWS Lambda and how that's actually being used for like calculations. And I like this particular approach with CloudHealth. This may not be security, But to be able to reach in and see what is the performance that's going on in your specific containers and actually be able to translate that back to your overall costs is critical, right? Because it used to be you run a server and you check the CPU utilization on that server, and if it's high, well, we need to upgrade it. If we're using too much disk, we've got to upgrade it. But now, whenever you're dealing with the cloud, and you have Azure and you have Amazon, you run into a massive problem in that you could have one misconfigured component that is spinning up like 90% of your costs, and there's a cheaper, easier way to actually go about doing that. So the question I have is, who's going to take that on? Is that part of DevOps? I would think that would be a big thing. Or is it going to be part of the security community to actually step into that as well? That I'm far less convinced on. But you're right. And Paul, we were talking about this earlier today. This is a huge series of talks that we need to start doing and webcasts that we need to start doing, because the vast majority of security professionals have no idea what container or Dockerized or any of these different security technologies actually are and how it's going to actually impact them.
I'm so excited. I don't want to spoil what may be in my talk for next year, but I've got a really funny graphic that depicts your journey with typical journey with Docker. I've also noticed that Kali Linux has some container information about using Docker with Kali Linux. It looks like they had their own registry and such. And I've utilized some of the tutorials, and having done a production Docker deployment, like there's so much more I think I can add. I think, based on my experience. And I can't wait to start doing that, because I don't know, I may get down and go, you know what, that was way more complicated than it needs to be, which is always the thought with Docker, but, you know, I want to try. Cool. I want to try.
But that's exactly what we're after. I think you and I kind of get into a little bit of technology fatigue. We're starting to become those old people in the room where everyone's like, look at this cool security technology. And we're sort of becoming like Marcus Ranum and Ron Gula and Jack in a way. We're like, yeah, we saw that 15 years ago in this thing, and what's old is new, and we're kind of curmudgeons. But I think both you and I would look at this idea of containers, and we'll just use Docker because that's the big one, right? It's brand spanking new, and it's so cool, and it's so different from anything that we've dealt with, that's exciting. So I think you talked to me about your presentation. I think it's going to be cool this next year in 2018.
You know what could be exciting? Next gen CASB 0-day protection.
Oh dear God! Which one did you just jump to? Did you just jump to BitGlass?
BitGlass, just way too much marketing and buzzword here. I mean, like, really, they're in the running for the most marketing and buzzword. I mean, they've renamed their entire product line. They front-ended it with the word 0-day. They're talking about app control, malware protection, managed app control, and this is just really full of buzzwords that I can't even tell what it does or how it could potentially help organizations.
Well, and I've been chatting with Brashan Haynes, Haynes, and he's been fantastic. I've been chatting back and forth with him, and he's been answering my questions very, very well. So nothing but hats off to him.
You're on the BitGlass website.
I'm on their website, and I love to do that thing where we chat with somebody, because a lot of their people are just technical support bots. But he got really, really excited, and basically what this boils down to is they partnered with Cylance. So whenever you run BitGlass, and I don't quite understand how the hell this works, but they're using Cylance to check the applications that are going into Google, into Office 365, and to be blunt, that's better than your traditional blacklisting AV. It's a hell of a lot better than what they have in place right now. So that's cool. It's just like you said, whenever they basically took the marketing from Cylance, and now they're infusing their marketing with the Cylance marketing, and it's just like, oh, come on, people, be a little bit more informed about what these products actually do.
Yeah. Let's see. I want to make sure we get to number 8 in the show notes. 10 steps to stop lateral movement in data breaches.
Such a good article.
Yeah, I at a high level, I think in the amount of words they were able to type in this article, they really captured it. I mean, I would go into more detail in certain areas, but I overall I agree. It's a pretty good article, and I think when I don't know, when I talk about lateral movement and securing your Active Directory or even your environment, I'm starting to put less and less focus on managing users' passwords and accounts, and more on managing the service accounts and credentials as a whole.
Well, and that's where CyberArk comes into play. And I'm starting to do Twitter surveys. If you guys track it, I'm going to put a product out there, and then people are going to say whether or not they like that product. Just because we talk about a lot of products on our show, and there's products that we have we have good experiences with. I think, actually, to be honest, pen testing, I've had horrific experiences with CyberArk, but that's good for you as a defender. And when we talk about that privileged identity and access management, this kind of was cool. 4% said the product was changed my life good. 53 said it was good. 32 said it was meh, like it was kind of in between, and only 11% said it was crap.
And that's a poll on CyberArk specifically.
Yep, just a poll on CyberArk. We only had 47 people respond, but I said, hey, please be a CyberArk person. So you have some trolls in here as well. But it's very rare in this industry that we actually see a product ever that we say, hey, what do you guys think of this? And we actually get the majority of the people say that it's good. That just doesn't happen very often. So I think that privileged identity and access management for like service accounts, administrator of accounts is critical. And I think that this survey actually kind of supports what you just said, Paul.
Yeah, and I read an article that I spoke about recently at Hackfest from Sean Metcalf, the maintainer of adsecurity.org, right? It's .org. And he has a set of recommendations to secure Active Directory. Largely what Sean is focusing on is the ability to control your service accounts. And in those other areas inside of Windows that aren't the end user's accounts, I really think the two-factor authentication is the way to control that. And the focus is really on those service accounts because of a lot of attacks and a lot of misuse, and not just the password for it, but the privilege that it has along with the password, to me has replaced my recommendation. If I do the top 6 to secure Active Directory, has replaced the user component and really put forth the controlling the privilege level of your services, not your users, your services. I mean, your users too, but I think more so your services and the credentials that go along with them. And as you said, companies like CyberArk, Psychotic, Lieberman, there's a whole, I mean, the list could go on forever to help you do that. And someone actually pointed out that Microsoft has a facility to help manage and control your service accounts and privileges, as well as these other vendors do as well. So.
And the one thing that I would strongly recommend, let's see who wrote this. It was written by Brad Hibbert.
Yep. From Beyond
Trust. He talks about,
which is another player in the space. Yeah.
We have a network segmentation, and they talked about micro segmentation. Go through and re-edit your article and say host-based firewalls on all of your workstations.
Well, that's what I read when he said micro segmentation. I was like, yeah, you mean like
call it out specifically, right?
Host-based firewalls.
Call it out specifically.
And someone had me qualify that, and I'm like, look, if your XP Service Pack 3 or greater, and believe me, I talk with people that have stuff before that, but that Windows host-based firewall is critical to controlling lateral movement. And we've called that out specifically, and that's how I read his point. And considering he hit on all those points as well as others that we hit on and agree with, I thought it was an article worth mentioning because if you do a lot of these things in here, you're going to be way more resilient to pen tests and attackers alike, which is what I was just talking about at a recent conference. So,
absolutely.
Cloudflare expands into mobile. I thought it was kind of weird. They bought a company.
Interesting play. It's not just mobile, dude. The company is a VPN for mobile company.
And it sounds like it's not like a VPN as an end user. It's a VPN like I have an app, and then I can put like a VPN inside that app, and it'll talk securely back and forth to wherever that app is being controlled. Which, okay, that's cool.
I think it's neat. I think that you see Cloudflare trying to expand their offerings, and I think this happens. I mean, Cloudflare for DDoS protection has kind of nailed it, right? There are vendors out there, of course. You would have like Newstar and some other people. But Cloudflare is pretty much the one that I see all the time. So it's interesting that they purchased them. And so where do you think they're going with this? Do you think that they're going for DDoS protection for mobile users to be able to access core company applications? Or do you think that they're going to start doing an analytics on the traffic that goes through the VPN, back through Cloudflare, back to the customer to start looking for compromised endpoint mobile devices? I don't know where they're headed with this.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's a good question.
So it's interesting, but they didn't buy it for what it is today. They're trying to buy it for what it can be and how it integrates into Cloudflare. And it'll just be interesting to see how this plays out.
I did have one last article, Securonics, which is a end user behavior analytics company. has partnered with Phantom Cyber. I don't know if they're just called Phantom now. Their reference is Phantom in the
They're just
title.
Phantom. Yeah, Phantom.
And so it's kind of an interesting combination, right? Like I can find users that are bad, and then the question becomes, well, what do I do? Well, now I can automate some processes and have a playbook that some components get automated, and then as it goes through the playbook, humans are integrated as a stopgap measure or a check, and you can customize your response and basically customize your response and automation and orchestration with a tool like Phantom, coupled with the information you're getting from Securonics.
I still boil this down to you better know what the hell you're doing before you purchase these products. If you're not someone that knows how to actually set this up and do it manually, then you shouldn't be screwing around with these types of automation platforms. If you're looking that you can buy an automation platform and you don't even have to worry about how this stuff is actually done, you're going to get screwed.
Yeah.
To actually set up the workflows and how these things work, you have to understand what's going to happen. You have to understand potential downstream impacts to the organization. So while I think these products have value, the only time we see these products actually work effectively is whenever they're being manned by really good teams, people that understand the technology, how it's being implemented. But if teams don't have the skill set, they buy these products and they just kind of sit in a closet and maybe send alerts to an email folder. But yeah, I very rarely see organizations that don't understand the underlying components in the security implement that type of automated response, what Phantom would allow you to do effectively, ever.
And I think it's a fantastic point, John, and we see this in all types of technology. If you haven't done the work to do it manually and then go, okay, now I understand how I would automate that. And if you skip that step of learning all the fundamental components, and there's a lot of analogies there in a lot of cases where that happens, how do you then go automate it? It's just like pen testing, right? If you haven't constructed the exploit, done the payload manually, you can't just jump into Metasploit. I mean, you could try, but people just want to jump into Metasploit and go, woohoo, I'm doing a pen test. You got to understand those underlying layers. And it's a similar message to what you're saying to adopting security orchestration and automation, and I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, that will conclude our episode for today. Again, you can get all the show notes for today's episode, wiki.securityweekly.com. Thank you, John, and thanks to Tony for appearing on this episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.